I will yell at Matt.
I feel like you usually do that.
Like, Matt. And I'll even call him Matthew, which is not his full name.
I'm gonna also get this up on my phone. I can use that as to see the chat. I was like, okay, that's your phone. I was like, is that through the computer? Or
I'm gonna turn that down so we're not getting just.
Let's just set different phones up throughout the room and just have them start at different spots. You just hear the voice constantly.
Oh, yes.
All right, we have two, but I think you're one of them.
I'm one of them, and you might be.
Oh, Matt's saying don't yell at me. He's here. Hey, Matt.
Hi, Matt.
All right. Well, we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. So to anyone that's online, which is pretty much you and Jackie right now, who's also here, so you. If you haven't yet read Acts chapter 8, verses 4 through mostly 14 for this week's episode, I thought it was more, I got that wrong. Go ahead and review that, and then we will start our discussion in about 2 minutes.
You just wanted us to have a deeper understanding of what was coming. That's all.
Right, of course.
And it was Monday morning.
Let's get rolling into it. First up is going to be meant for a larger discussion, but seeing as there's not a large group here, I have a feeling which we're going on this one, but I guess for the sake of the future stream, if any of our regular attendees tune in later, I think I'm going to assume reality is because of the church's decision to go to virtual only on Tuesday night, that's also going to apply to our study. And so next week, I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna do this by Zoom. And I know Zoom is not going to prevent us from watching the show as a group either. So we'll do it by Zoom. I will share my screen and we'll watch the show on my screen, and then we'll gather as a community on Zoom and discuss everything afterwards. So tune in by computer ideally so you can watch, but you don't have to use your webcam if you don't want. If anything changes, we will probably meet back again if by chance Cuyahoga County goes back into the orange, but I suspect we'll probably be like this for at least a month because cases have been on the rise for the past few months, so we'll see how it goes. All right, prep for the app, we already did that. So we'll move on to the main section of our show today. It was a little bit more of Saul rounding people up out of their homes that started in last week and then continued this week. But we also had the first bit of being introduced to Simon the Magician. So I am curious for your thoughts on how well the show did both with Saul rounding people up and also how it did with the introduction of Simon the Magician as related to our text. Feel free.
I mean, I thought the addition of the Good Samaritan
was cheesy?
was Yeah. Didn't probably achieve what they wanted. I mean, I'm happy they kind of played it out and actually had someone help him, but
Right.
that was just drama.
And I think we also came to the conclusion that was it even Philip that necessarily went?
I think it was Philip who went, but he didn't get beat up.
Yes.
I did like, though, for Simon, that they used, so we found out that he was a historical figure, well written about, well documented, and that he was known for levitating. So I really appreciated that they used that.
The extra
and that
research.
It was research, and that's, that's how that trick works. Like, how they showed him is the exact pose from, I've seen so many stereotypical Middle Eastern old man magician doing it.
Yes. In the scripture, it also says that the people eagerly greet Philip.
Okay. The people who robbed him, they were very eager.
They were eager, you're not wrong.
That's all I can say for that.
Value helped Philip an associate.
He was, yes. I do not believe he is spoken about, though, in the scripture.
No, it was just, from what I remember, the scriptures, Philip got to Samaria, they were really happy he was there. And it was a little less about Simon doing stuff, just he's a known snake oil salesman.
Right. I feel like they got it relatively right, you know. They paid close attention, they were excited with shrieks of joy when people were healed. So overall 4 to 8 went pretty good, except the people weren't terribly excited to meet him, and there was no evidence of him being beat up on the way. That was just a very cheeky way to insert the Good Samaritan story into the debate.
They really just dug in for that line.
Yes. Simon the Sorcerer, looking at sections 9 through 13, because Peter didn't come yet.
No.
So the Good Samaritan is a con man. Yeah, according to the show, yeah, that is the case. You raise a good point. That really does kind of ruin a well-loved Jesus story. Hadn't considered it that way.
Any redeeming quality now just gone.
It's also worth mentioning, as I should probably say this is someone that's kind of learned in the culture of this. The Samaritans and the people of Jerusalem, although they were different in sort of their theology and their culture, it was not such an insane difference that they would have like actively hated each other. It was more of a, they didn't really see eye to eye. I guess you could say it's very similar to, in our current culture of how a more progressive person views a conservative person, how a conservative person views a more progressive person. It's this idea that we know somewhere innately we're all Americans, but we don't really want to actively seek out to talk to people on the other side. That's more of how the Samaritan and Jerusalem context would have looked like in America. They were all Jews. They were all Jews of the greater Jerusalem, Israel context, but viewed things a little bit differently. And so the likelihood of violence happening, very small. Very, very small. Did the show say that Simon's power came from God? Yes or no?
No. I don't think it said. It was just, I just got to be the snake oil salesman, essentially.
Right. He was just a magician in the show, Whereas in scripture, at least on NRSV, it says, this man is rightly called by the great power of God.
Okay, yeah, I didn't see them saying that. And, I mean, if he was trying to sell that when Philip came up to heal that woman, he would have been like, yeah, of course this will work, because you're also
Right.
from God. And he's like, bro, this won't work.
So Jackie brought up a pretty good point in the moment when we were watching the show, that Simon, it says in the scripture in verse 13, that Simon himself believed and was baptized, and that he followed Philip everywhere, astonished by the great signs and miracles he saw. In the show, it sort of appears, in my opinion, that the look he gives to his associate is kind of like, I'm going to get this kind of power, and the power I'm going to use it for my own purposes, not God's purposes. Would you say the show did a good job or a poor job of, do you think Simon actually believed in the show, or do you think he was meh? Thoughts?
Well, what you brought up about, when we found out that he was such a well-documented figure,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they glossed over a little bit of his character in the scripture. Because it was one of those things that, like we were saying before, that everyone at that time would have known of who he was and what his story was. So when they said believed, maybe they really meant like quote marks around
Right.
believed. Or believed it would benefit him, and because it wasn't written for people 2,000 years later necessarily, so like, just because we don't know that character.
Right. I'm looking up to confirm before I speak, so you'd be done with me. But yes, okay. So Simon the magician is, as Jackie was teasing out a little bit, is actually a really well-written character. And the name you might be more familiar with is that he is Simon the Gnostic, and is written by many of the early church writers, including Josephus, as being described as the father of Gnosticism. The Gnostic movement is, to some degree, a continuation of what we would call an agnostic today. An agnostic being, I can't confirm that God exists, but I also can't deny that God exists. Whereas an atheist would outright just say God doesn't exist. The Gnostics were somewhat of a similar belief-ish. As the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy says, just to make sure I get this correct, the Gnostics, in their reading of Scripture, acknowledged no such debt, for they believed that the Hebrew Bible was the written revelation of an inferior creator God, filled with lies intended to cloud the minds and judgment of spiritual human beings. Gnostics were much more, I guess, this is still kind of a stretch, but kind of Wiccan, if you will. They were more believed in the spiritual forces of the world, and not necessarily an idea of a deos, of a god. Are we kind of right with that? Pagan-ish, yeah. It's more this idea of nature and connecting with nature. That was more of the Gnostic movement, and I think the show does a decent job with kind of showing Simon is the magician more in terms of powers that humans have, not necessarily gifted by a god, but humans can be filled with a power somehow. So yeah, Gnostics, fun stuff.
I respect him a little bit more after hearing that. Just because there's a lot of people I know who have, maybe not the healing power of people, but the healing power of nature to an extent.
It's a very good observation, Matt. That's very true. Yeah.
Money is the source of it. You're going to see more of it next week. I thought it was in this week as well, but the Simon story does continue when Peter and John come to town and they get to meet Simon. Because Philip's going to be like, hey, I got us a new follower. Check him out. He's really cool. And then the whole money thing comes up. So yeah. Good thing that doesn't happen in church anymore, right? Oh, fun fact. Was Jackie and I discovered simony is a tongue-in-cheek that is described of people who want to buy power or influence in the church. And
that never happens anymore.
Previous church I served, I can certainly say there was someone who 80% of the church's budget was this person's donation, and they made life very fun. Very fun.
Oh no.
Yes, in the show he was just a magician. They didn't dive into any of the Gnosticism stuff. But I encourage you to Google a little bit of Gnostics because they're pretty neat. It's also, if you're interested in some of the other non-canonical Gospels, which I think are fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So plenty of Gospels were written and just weren't included in the final version of the book. And the Gospel of Thomas. Thomas was the doubting apostle that wanted to see Jesus's hands and wounds and stuff. The Gospel of Thomas is also considered a Gnostic gospel, and you'll catch a few areas of that. And then the Gospel of Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, also gives a really cool insight as to why Judas may have done what he did, and is also a Gnostic gospel. Judas thinking that he was helping to unlock powers in humans doing what he was doing. So I invite you to read those if you want some fun extra reading. Yep, Dead Sea Scrolls belong to the Essenes. You'll get a little bit more of that towards the end of Zealot, I believe, if I remember correctly. Okay. I'm going to do a couple fun facts now, and then we'll jump into discussion time. So overall, I think we're giving this a...
I mean, it
Eh?
added some flair. So it's like that kid who writes an essay and they don't know what they're talking about, so they talk about anything that might be.
Right.
So it's usually good for like a B-.
B- from Jackie, okay.
I mean, I'm being fairly generous.
Matt calls it Bible fanfic.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Not wrong.
They said it wasn't spicy enough. We need...
Right. That never happens in the show.
I mean, I will say I do like getting to see more of Mary Magdalene and Mary Mama. Like getting to see that, and then Peter's daughter, like getting to see them not just from a male perspective.
Yeah, and getting to see the little bit of empowerment among...
And seeing her say that quote of love your enemy.
With a little bit of angst in her heart.
With a little bit of, what you gonna do about it.
Matt gives it a pretty good grading too. So everyone, overall, the show's still staying pretty good. So a couple of fun facts though. The emperor, I meant to say, the emperor never visited Jerusalem. That would have happened. The emperor would never leave Rome because that would be incredibly dangerous. And also Jerusalem, although a big deal in like the Judeo-Christian culture,
Yeah.
it's really not that big of a place like in the world, And Rome conquered just an indescribable amount of land back in the day, and for him to just come down to Jerusalem to pay a visit and to give a grade to Pilate just wouldn't happen. It would be once Pilate got called back to Rome, then he would have a conversation with him, but it just would never have happened. So I'm glad they did this storyline because it wouldn't fit otherwise to have Pilate go back in a later time, but it's not technically correct because of a few things. Tiberius retires to an island of Capri in 26 CE, and that's before Jesus even died. Jesus died in about 33 CE-ish, and we know at this point in the show we're at about 37 CE, so this is a good 10 years before Tiberius would have even been around, and I believe he dies in like 35 CE. So that didn't happen. However, on that topic, Pilate did have a review. Pilate was called back and did have a review on how he's doing as a governor. He was removed from office partly because of the Jerusalem situation, but also at the time in 37 CE, which is about where we are in the show, Pilate was serving in Syria at the time, and reports from Syrian documents show that Pilate was once again excessively violent, and as a result was causing bad tensions and bad blood between Rome and its occupants, so Pilate was removed from office for that reason. So I think the show did a pretty decent job of kind of tying history in to show that Pilate loved his job so much and loved Rome so much that it actually kind of strangled Rome, and that he was under scrutiny, but it did not happen in Jerusalem.
So he was too much of a nationalist.
Yeah.
I couldn't help it.
Yeah. You're right, Matt. They do a really good job with showing the Roman Jewish authorities, and Caiaphas and Pilate did have a great relationship. So what's happening in the show was kind of a political game that you could see nowadays, and it kind of helps us to see that, you know, the Bible isn't that much different than our own culture now, and we're all kind of looking out for ourselves and how to climb the ladder. Finally, Caligula. Oh my gosh, Caligula. I think the actor that plays him just does a phenomenal job. He just makes you so uncomfortable whenever he's on screen. He's that young kid that made all those comments and like choked out that dude because they touched him for being a Roman. So Caligula does become the next emperor after Tiberius dies, and he is emperor for like 2 years. And that's because he's infamous, because he's very degrading. He had like 40 wives, like 100 concubines at all times. He was constantly drunk. He did not take it seriously at all, and then he was killed by his own people 2 years later, and the next Roman emperor comes in. So Caligula, great guy, and the actor played him wonderfully. You'll see more of him next week, and I think you'll love it. So overall, the show in terms of historical accuracy was pretty good. In terms of even cultural context, pretty good. I think the only major error it got was, again, Samaria and Jerusalem were not enemies. They just didn't view the temple the same way. I don't actually know that, Matt, but if he did, that would make me really happy. If someone wants to fact check that, I would love it. What a guy, that'd be incredible. Well, it's kind of like now we have, like, is it a dog? A mayor of some
I think so.
some
I
city?
think a dog is a mayor of a small town.
There's
And
like
he looks
25
like-
people in it or something.
He looks like a good boy.
Nice. I want to go there.
No, Caligula, I mean, it's a young adult series. It's the guy who did Percy Jackson. And he
Yeah.
has a current series, and Caligula's a bad guy in the series. He's not as bad as Nero, but he is not a good dude.
Right. So discussion time. One thing that that stuck out to me, or I reacted to the first time I've watched this show, and I've seen it a few times, is I kind of found Philip's reaction to the people of Samaria is somewhat culturally insensitive. Because he just sort of walks into their culture and says, all this is fake and you're wrong and you're con men, and that only Christianity, only Jesus is the real way. And I know it's a little tricky of a subject because, like Scripture says, the only way to the Father is through me, right? But what we see in our current times is more of a interfaith relationship, especially between the three monotheistic religions, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian. And when I react to the scene, I imagine like a Christian walking to Mecca, which is an extremely holy place for Muslims, and just being like, it's cool in all what you're doing, but it's stupid because Jesus is the only way. And I wonder if anyone else reacted the same way I did to that. And also, further, if you want to go with it, what's your take on like the whole power of prayer healing thing, or like the people that asked to be healed by prayer, or any of that kind of stuff? Because you're seeing a little bit of that here in the show.
No, I think it's like he was kind of scoffing in the background. So he definitely wasn't getting on anyone's good side. He came in with his established ideas, which I know I've done in the past. Like, I've gone into situations which I try to do less of now, or at least listen before I speak about things. But I mean, it that is one of the things I think that happens with a lot of Christianity, and sometimes with people I know who are newer, like people who came into Christianity later in life, that then they get really like, oh, well, it's only this, guys. You're doing that and that's all right, but it's not going to do anything to help you.
Right.
And yeah, so I try to think there's a reason for everything, and there's a reason for different beliefs in different cultures, and maybe it's just the way that it can be best explained and understood to different people.
Yeah.
And that's why it happens that way. I mean, I'm someone who grew up loving, as I was going to church and stuff, reading Greek mythology and just going, that's so cool, yes, falling in love with all the gods, and then learning later terrible, terrible facts about them. And
Right.
still thinking it's interesting, but, and yes, that religion has died out, and Viking, Scandinavian religion is not really practiced in a lot of places, but there are other religions that are still very much practiced, and I've said, well, the core values seem to be pretty similar, though. It's treat your neighbor as you'd want to be treated.
Yeah.
And so I said, there's got to be a reason for that. But it's in your culture how you're best able to practice it. So I can't judge it based on how I grew up.
I like that.
But it's something because I was able to get out of Chagrin and out of Ohio for college and go to a school that was very, very not religious at all. It was full of mostly atheist, maybe some agnostic, but everyone there was like, you go to your church more than once a week? And,
Right.
And I didn't vote for Bush? I was crazy. And I have a science background too, so for part of me, like, there's so many phenomena that I go, okay, well, there's some, like, evidence and science behind that, and
Right.
I don't know, I try to keep an open mind. It doesn't always work, but I try.
Right. Yeah, I think there are certainly circumstances where people just get better. Miracles happen. Miracle in quote happen, and people just recover, or they live way longer than they were supposed to. And I think part of that is that support system that the church develops. I think part of it is that psychological hope you feel knowing that people are actively praying on your behalf. So I think there's something to it, but
They've shown scientific studies of good thoughts. If you have more positivity surrounding you,
right.
I think part of it, your brain's able to put off different endorphins that only help.
Have you ever seen the experiment that if you talk to plants, they grow bigger?
I don't know if I don't think can't remember if your tone of voice matters.
Like if you yell at them, they don't grow as much. You're crazy.
Well, because part of me, the science in me is going, well, yes, you're giving them extra CO2. If you're talking right to them, that's your breath, and that's carbon dioxide, which they need
right.
to grow. So I can't help myself in that. Yeah. I don't know. I think prayer is not a bad thing, but I don't think it can be the only thing.
Yeah. And I think that's what Matt's saying in here too, is that that science is a product of faith. And it's that comic, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but like someone's drowning in an ocean and they're praying up to God and they're like, God save me, and then like a helicopter goes by or a boat goes by and eventually they die, and then he yells at God for not coming to save him. And God's like, well, I sent you a boat, I sent you a helicopter, and I stopped the storm for a month. Like, what more do you want me to do?
Okay, I was thinking of the comic of the hand being held out and it's like a high five. Thoughts and prayers. Sorry, I went dark.
Yeah, absolutely. My mom raised us exclusively on like a homeopathic way. I didn't go to a doctor until I was like 10, so I feel you on that, and I know how important that stuff is to some people and how real it is and how it works. All right, the last question I had, as we bring some together, is I think kind of a theme of this episode is having to go out of your comfort zone and then realizing it was the exact place you needed to be. So Philip, had some hesitation about going there as his disciples looked around and said, like, hey, you shouldn't go, they'll kill you, And whether or not that's true, ignore that for now. But he needed to be there because he, that was great for the church, and he also got to experience different cultures and all that good stuff. So I'm curious if there's been a situation where you went to a place that was outside your comfort zone, but you knew somewhere inside you was exactly where you needed to be, and how did that help make you a better person too?
Before I think of any and share any, I do want to say I think it would have been more effective if Philip didn't have anything bad happen to him.
The idea being like I had so many stereotypes,
like,
and then
I had the and then like it was perfectly fine.
oh, so like what you're saying is if they just stuck to the scripture,
If they just stuck to the scripture.
yeah.
Weird. And I guess, well, okay, so I have parents who raised me to always go help out if I could. Like, they would take us into downtown Cleveland on Christmas Eve to help serve food and give presents out. But because they did that from when I was like 5, for me it wasn't necessarily anything I felt super uncomfortable with. I knew I looked different than just about everyone I was interacting with. But because it was when I was little, and it was always just, we're going there to help people out, I can't always say that was my comfort zone, but I guess the closest would be when we had the service projects in the summer.
Oh, right.
And so that's just, you're going down somewhere to people who have such different things than what you have. So the comfort, it's not that I felt uncomfortable there, I didn't want to, it was trying to monitor what I said because I don't want to be making them feel bad. But I don't know, it's a lot of just how my parents raised me, that it was, you go into things and you try to look at other people. That's partly why when I was teaching, I was happy to be going down into Canton, which I guess was a bit out of my comfort zone because I was teaching in a school where I was a minority, but I was happy about that. It made some things harder because I didn't want to be like, oh, I'm the white teacher here, save you.
Yeah,
like,
right.
That's not what I was trying to go down to that area for, but I don't know, it got to the point where I went to a church in North Canton, I went, oh, it's too white.
I think for me, especially at this church, I thought of, when I first got called to be here, it was, I didn't dread it, but working with youth was not something I'm very good at, I think it's because, especially in this context, I knew Bob, and I knew the kind of personality Bob had, which was extremely energetic, and silly and fun and all of that. And I think I associated, or I stereotyped, a youth director has to be someone that is goofy and silly and someone that throws pie at themselves, or someone that it's just crazy, and I knew that wasn't me. And I didn't think I would ever go to connect the kids here because I wasn't that person. And I think I have found that I love Wednesdays because I know it's going to be a time I get to see the kids. So being here was going out of my comfort zone, realizing it was for the better. I also think in high school too, I had all I did was ever run, like all I ever did. And then my senior year, I decided I want to be like everything. That fear of missing out. So, so I did like campus ministry or whatever. But I also signed up or auditioned to be part of the play. And I never ever thought of doing something like that. I never wanted to do anything like that. And I got the second lead role, and it was like the best memory of my entire high school career. Working with so many people I never would have worked with. Hell Week when you're learning dances until like midnight every night, and just incredible. So I can say the best parts of my life have been venturing out of my comfort zone. And if you haven't done that in a long time, try it again soon, because it really is an act of faith and really can spark you back up again. Had to do that last Sunday. That was scary. So
You did so good.
But yeah, but you're right. I think that's one of the best things college can ever do for us. It's not the stuff we learn necessarily, it's the people we interact with. I'm glad that was true for you as well.
I mean, I didn't think of college as an uncomfortable thing because I was like, it's Colorado. This is where I go.
Yeah, true.
And it's a bunch of adventure-loving people. But there were, it's when I first had people going, oh, you're Christian? I wouldn't have guessed that.
Right.
Which we've talked about in the past.
Yeah.
But I mean, still saying that the college I went to was not incredibly diverse.
Well, as we come into a close, just another book I'd recommend to you guys, since you're the only ones with me today, right?
I think Ellen was here for a little bit.
She was. Someone else joined for a minute.
They were there for a bit.
Is if you're enjoying Zealot, that's by Reza Aslan. He's a fabulous author. I really enjoy his work. And another book I recommend that I think kind of helps in interfaith relations is God. It's just called God, and it's his newest book. If you do the audiobook version, it's only like 5 hours, and he reads it, which is kind of fun. Basically, it is the historical story of how humans created God, more or less, and how we understood God based on our present understanding, all the way back from like the Neanderthals to when we first started to settle down, to when we first started to have kings. You get to understand how Yahweh became a thing, how the Christian God became a thing, how the Muslim understanding of God became a thing, and he condenses all this down into 5 hours of enjoyable reading. And I think it makes, for me, was one, fascinating, but two, also made me a much more empathetic person to other faith groups. And if anything is true in America right now, it would be nice to have a bit more empathy in general, and especially towards minorities. Just last night at the Interfaith Vigil, we had someone drive by and yell out a profanity, because there were Jews and Muslims there. And we need a bit more love. So if you are interested in more books, I encourage you to read that. Otherwise, thank you all for joining on week 7 of our time together. Next week we will meet by Zoom. So I'll get that information out to you, or Jackie will, on Monday. And thank you for being here. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you again soon.